Hello, everybody, and welcome to this first Nature Crime Alliance webinar. I'm Luke Foddy. I'm the Communications Manager for the Nature Crime Alliance, and it's my absolute pleasure to welcome you all here today. Thank you so much for joining us for what promises to be a really interesting discussion. Just so you are all aware, we are recording this session, and the video will be available publicly on our website from tomorrow, from Thursday. Now, as many of you will know, the Nature Crime Alliance officially launched in August of this year. And since then, we've been building our global network of actors from a range of sectors who are all involved in the fight against nature crime. And the aim of these sessions is to bring those actors together to find out more about their own individual work, but also to share ideas, learnings, best practice, and also to identify areas of potential collaboration between other members of the Nature Crime Alliance and indeed our wider network. And just on that point, we've got three really cool presentations for you today. I can't wait to get stuck into them. We'll begin by Jenna Robertson from the Wildlife Justice Commission. And Jenna will be talking to the recent WJC report looking at wildlife crime and its convergence with other forms of organized crime. And then we'll be going to Andrea Costa, from the founder of Earth League International, who will be talking to us about criminal networks in Latin America, whose activities are increasingly involved in environmental crime. And then I'm really looking forward to hearing from Braddock Spear from the Sustainable Fisheries Partnership, because he'll be talking to us about the work that they're doing with FAO on universal fisheries IDs, which aim to increase transparency in the fisheries sector and hopefully make life more uncomfortable for the networks involved in illegal fishing. But before we get into all of that, it's my great pleasure to welcome the director of the Nature Crime Alliance, Julia Stange, who will be sharing some thoughts on the year so far and our plans for 2024. So Julia, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Luke, and a big thank you to our group of panelists for this, for joining us in this inaugural webinar session. Very much looking forward to hearing about all of your work in tackling nature crime. As it's always great to have some specific concrete examples as we wind down the year to remind us where we can make progress. But first, I just wanted to take a few minutes in this webinar on behalf of the Secretariat to update and reflect. It's always nice at the end of year time. And I think the biggest achievement in 2023 won't be a surprise for you. It's that the Nature Crime Alliance actually does exist now. As Luke mentioned, we launched in August on the sides of the 7th General Assembly of the Global Environment Facility in Vancouver. Many of you were involved in this event, both in person, including one of our panelists, as well as part of the digital launch with video statements that we ran alongside the in-person launch. You were also involved by joining the Alliance as participating organizations or governments, as well as some of you signing up to the Vancouver Statement on Nature Crime that was released alongside the launch. And then we also welcomed the UN Office of Drugs and Crime as a key partner in the Secretariat in August as part of the launch. So a great milestone to have finally reached, but I think more impressive for me than the date itself of the launch and the events around it is what it took to get there. And we as a Secretariat are extremely fortunate to have had the active participation of an immensely impressive group of organizations, governments, and individuals that gave their time and their expertise in the development phase to co-create this alliance that we now all have as an available tool and platform for tackling nature crime. So a big thank you to everyone involved in the development phase of this alliance, and a particular thank you also to Norway and the US in playing such a leading role, and also, of course, for providing financial support initially to get us up and running. So at the heart of these discussions in developing the alliance for the past 2 years, what came through clearly was a few things. One, the added value of such a multi-stakeholder platform was reiterated to us over and over again. And we recognize that law enforcement ultimately sits with governments, but that many others can contribute valuable information and approaches in getting us there and in deterrence. And that's what some of our speakers today will speak to. We also heard over and over again the need to look at the bundle of nature crimes as a group, to look for these convergence points, to look for criminals acting across multiple of these crime types, as well as convergence points on the approaches for tackling them and the tools and collaboration opportunities. We also heard about the huge amount of funding needed for activities at the scale that would be necessary to actually have an impact in stopping nature crime. We heard for the need for better connections between geographies, crime types, and stakeholder types. And we also heard the need to scale what's already working so that we're not reinventing the wheel. So the Alliance was given an impressive mandate by all of you who contributed to developing it. And we strive as a Secretariat to support the Alliance in all of these things. So just to highlight a few priorities for 2024, it'll be no surprise. We've been talking about these working groups. We've been developing them. Many of you have already stepped up to take leading roles, either as individual subject matter experts or as organizations co-chairing these working groups. But 2024 will see us as an alliance roll out and implement a series of working groups to tackle nature crime. And these are from topics ranging from financial crime to the use of tools and technology to supporting frontline defenders and to mobilizing funding at scale. Next year, we're also going to prepare for and to possibly already hold, but it might be early 2025, our first annual or biannual gathering of Alliance participants. And the Secretariat's already busy scoping with many of you what will be most useful for its members. And lastly, in an exciting, interesting shift in some of our scoping discussions in the last couple of months has seen the Secretariat develop and look at offerings around dot connecting tools that would be useful for its members to really fulfill that dot connecting function and convener function. And that involves a few different things, including a knowledge database of all of the reports indexed in an easily accessible format. Also a tools database in terms of all the tools out there and available for nature crime and those Alliance members who are perhaps already using them and happy to assist. To a few other tools that we're exploring. So very excited about what's ahead and working with all of the members as the Secretariat to bring it together. We look forward to the new year and to working with all of you across the Alliance, both the current members and the ones that have yet to join. And we obviously have really grand plans that we're going to implement together. And these are the plans that you helped to create. So looking forward to next year. And with that, I'll turn back to Luke to start us off with our first speaker.
Thank you, Yulia, for that really good update. Lots to look forward to in 2024, and I really hope to see everybody on this call in some way working with us next year and indeed beyond. Okay, let's get stuck into our presentations. We've got 3 great presentations for you today. Just before we do, we are putting questions to our speakers. So if you would like to ask a question to one of our speakers today, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom window, and then I'll try and pick a few out after their presentations to put to them. I can't promise I'll get to everybody because we are constrained by time, but I'll do my best. And on that note, it's my great pleasure to hand over to Jenna Robertson, who is an intelligence manager for marine investigations at the Wildlife Justice Commission. And she's going to talk to us about the recent WJC report on wildlife crime convergence with other forms of organized crime. So Jenna, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Luke. Good afternoon, good morning to wherever you are. My name is Jenna Robertson, and I'm the Intelligence Manager for Marine Investigations at the Wildlife Justice Commission. Just a quick 30-second reminder of who we are and what it is that we do. So our mission is to disrupt and dismantle transnational organized crime networks that traffic in wildlife, fish, and timber. And we do this by treating wildlife crime like the serious organized crime offense it is. So we use the same investigative techniques with our investigations like you would any other crime, like drugs or organized crime, like surveillance and undercover operations. While we are not law enforcement, we do work very closely with law enforcement to bring down the highest level traffickers to justice. And so far, we've had over 200 arrests and 100% conviction rate for all cases brought to the courts. We also consistently share our findings with the public and law enforcement and other stakeholders around the world, which includes the publishing of multiple reports every year. So today I'll be sharing some of our most recent report on crime convergence, which supports the overarching belief that wildlife crime is a cross-cutting criminal activity that really cannot be tackled in isolation. So as wildlife crime has become a more serious and lucrative crime, so is the involvement of organized crime and the crossover to other forms of crime. So in 2021, the WJC published 12 case studies that provided examples of criminal networks dealing in wildlife parts and products alongside other illegal commodities. It also established 5 key typologies to describe the connections between converging crime, which we categorized as the first one being opportunistic. So this usually takes place on an ad hoc basis to take advantage of a particular opportunity. Diversification. As criminal groups mature, they often diversify the goods and products that they have access to. Transactional, so where criminal groups are operating in different markets, purchase or exchange goods or services with each other. Embedded convergence, so where the crime types are inextricably linked. And lastly, career shift. So this is where criminal groups change course from one type of crime to another. So at the time in 2021, there were mostly anecdotal reports of wildlife crime convergence and limited data or analysis. But since then, the body of evidence has grown significantly, which allowed us to provide our own analysis and insights from 3 different case studies based on open source research and intelligence collected during our own investigation. And today, I will speak very quickly on 2 of the case studies. So the first case study involves violent criminal networks engaged in rhino poaching in South Africa's Kruger National Park and other criminal activities, including cash in transit heists, loan sharking, money laundering, murder, and tax evasion and extortion. So in September 2018, 7 members of a rhino horn trafficking network were arrested in South Africa as part of Project Broadbill, which was one of the biggest operations of its kind in the country. They were alleged to have organized a logistics, communications, and sales network of rhino poaching groups to smuggle rhino horn from Kruger to Asia. The 7 members included 2 violent kingpins, Subject P and Subject J, a former police officer, 2 other former police officers, and 2 current serving members. They were all charged with theft, conspiracy to commit a crime, legally buying and selling rhino horns, corruption, and money laundering. Multiple luxury vehicles were also seized, cash alongside animal skins and property worth millions of South African rands. At the time of their arrest, Subject P and Subject J were actually on bail in relation to other cases. Both had a very long criminal history. Subject P had been linked to rhino horn trafficking since 2005, and at the time, prosecutors said that he shouldn't be released because of his high likelihood to recommit the same crimes. And over the years, he's been rearrested and charged on multiple occasions in relation to rhino poaching, firearms, and fraud-related offenses, conspiracy to commit murder after he and 3 other subjects killed a man who actually owed them money, and they just dumped his body in a river. So Subject J, the former police officer, also had a very long criminal history involving kidnapping, murder, rhino-related offenses, racketeering, the use of shell companies to launder the proceeds of crime, and tax evasion. Subject J clearly had very powerful connections. The kidnapping and murder case that he was involved in would never be concluded, and actually any record of that case was later scrubbed from any court records. Regarding his tax evasion case, where he was found to owe over 21 million rands to the South African Revenue Service, the High Court later canceled the auction of his seized property. So sadly, this case came to a head when the lead investigator on the file was shot and killed with a high caliber weapon on his way to work. There were 17 bullet holes in the car, which you can see here on the slide. He had previously stated that he had feared for his own life and for anybody working on this investigation, so it was quite tragic. And this case study begins to conclude with the fatal shooting of Subject P in 2021, along with his close associate and his wife this past spring. Subject J, for his part, was rearrested this past May again after a high-speed police chase in which he was on bail in relation to the 4 ongoing cases. So none of Subject J's investigations in the last 13 years have concluded. The long court delays, combined with the constant granting of bail and corruption within the criminal justice system, really created an environment where they could act with impunity. This second and last case study I'll discuss today suggests crime convergence between the seafood industry and drug trafficking networks involved in tax evasion, money laundering, and corruption. And in this case specifically, we're focused on the sea cucumber trade in Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, where the Sinaloa cartel is systematically taking over the fishing industry. So the public first heard about this connection back in June 2009, when the Mexican Navy seized 893 kilograms of cocaine that was concealed in 97 frozen shark carcasses. So this was smuggled from Costa Rica, ultimately destined for Mexico. Investigations showed that a Mexican businessman was responsible for organizing the smuggling operation. Over a period of 2 months alone, they estimated that the Mexican businessman was supplied with 45,000 kilograms of sharks to conceal the cocaine. Mexican authorities claim that this scheme continued until 2017, when Subject M was arrested after they discovered he was using refrigerators belonging to his seafood business to store the sharks. The operation overall was attributed to the Sinaloa cartel. So Subject M and his family have owned and operated a group of seafood companies in Puerto Progreso, Mexico, dedicating to fishing, processing, and trading seafood product for more than 30 years, including exportation of high volumes of products, particularly to the US and to Hong Kong. So their products are typically sourced directly from their own fleets, but also from independent fishers in Yucatan that they force to sell to them. So Subject M is known colloquially in the community as the Sea Cucumber King, and he's heavily involved with what's known as the Sea Cucumber Mafia in Mexico. He evaded arrest in 2011 after he was accused of orchestrating the armed robbery of a competitor's warehouse of multiple tons of sea cucumber. And over the next 2 years, Subject M was linked to several warehouse raids and seizures of over 1,200 kilograms of sea cucumbers. One of the a vehicle owned by the Merida City Council was also seized. It was believed that they were using this to run errands for the Sea Cucumber Mafia. There was another subject E. He was also alleged to be a co-owner of the sea cucumbers, but evaded any arrests or penalties due to his involvement with the now defunct Beltran Leyva cartel. Subject M was later implicated in 2015 when Mexico seized a historic 17 tons of sea cucumber. And in 2020, a financial investigation was launched into Subject M, which suggested heavy activities in money laundering and tax evasion schemes. Yet, despite these claims, Subject M was never fully investigated, and he continues to operate today with impunity. Recently, he shifted his business activities to octopus and lobster, in which he's already been accused of illegally harvesting and poaching. So to finish off my quick presentation today, this report did have several recommendations that came with it. So the first being we need to have increased timely intelligence collection. So governments really need to prioritize this and the creation of their own intelligence databases and to share it efficiently, both internally and externally. Second, we need to do more organized crime mapping. It's essential to determine how and when the crime convergence is taking place. And it also assists in determining the overall threat level. We need to have multi-agency cooperation, something we all know very well. Joint investigations and task forces should be used when necessary to facilitate the information sharing. Number 4, using alternative legislation. Consider using different legislation relating to the convergent crime, which may make it easier and faster to get a charge. Conducting parallel financial and corruption investigations, again, something we hear of frequently. This will assist in identifying any money laundering and corruption offenses, the payment methods used, as well as assisting in asset recovery. And lastly, we also recommend making greater use of specialized investigative techniques. So crime convergence can easily be detected through the use of controlled deliveries, tracking devices, undercover operations, and communications interception. So that was it for me today. Thank you very much to the Nature Crime Alliance, to Luke and Emily for having me here today. Hopefully you had some takeaways from my presentation on our crime convergence report, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Thank you, Jenna, for a really interesting and very concise report, but also very sobering, really kind of driving home the human impacts of these activities, certainly in the first case study, and also illuminating in the second case study just the amount of convergence that's going on. So thank you for that really, really useful work. I mean, I'll kick off with the first question if you'll allow me. I guess one of the things which I always wonder about these kind of investigations, a lot of the people that you're investigating work in the dark, in the shadows. There's not much public information available. You know, they don't declare their profits or their market share. So, I mean, what are the biggest challenges when you're putting together research projects like this, especially in terms of understanding these criminal networks?
Yeah, so like you said, the biggest challenge is that the information can be very difficult to find, especially with these high-level traffickers who are very aware of their online presence. Because, you know, naturally as an intelligence analyst, my first thought is to go, okay, let's see what's available online. So I think that does pose a very significant challenge, but I think using investigative techniques that we traditionally use for other types of crime are very, very effective. And for our team personally, even having something as simple as a phone number and engaging them through text message or various social media apps is very effective and often the best way for us to start a relationship with them. And that's how we build their trust and eventually figure out what it is that they're up to.
Great. Thank you very much. We have another question from the group. asking, is there proper guidance for criminals to enable them to pursue alternative, environmentally sustainable livelihoods? I guess in certain contexts, some people are driven to crime, maybe when they don't necessarily want to.
Yeah.
Is this something that you're working on? Thanks.
So as a part of our mission, that's not something that we directly work on ourselves, but to give you an example, last year we released a public report on our investigation into tiger-related crime in Southeast Asia. And one of the initiatives from what we know in Southeast Asia is that the owners of tiger farms need an incentive to have some sort of alternative for their crime because, it's all they know. And a lot of the time, some people are just trying to put food on the table and to house their family, as you mentioned. And so I'm aware that there's an initiative taking place in that region to try and figure out if there can be an alternative source of income for these people. And I have also heard that I believe it's ongoing in Mexico as well, so that they don't have to turn to crime.
Great. Thank you, Jenna. One more question, if we can. In terms
Sure.
of the connections that the Nature Crime Alliance can bring to WJC, I mean, you're part of this network that we're building, a multi-sector network, crucially. Which areas do you think of the Nature Crime Alliance would you be particularly keen on working with to help you with your work? Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, for me, I think we really need to work closer with the other NGOs that are engaged in the same type of activity. So, Earth League International, EIA, the others that are working the same things to make sure that we're not investigating the same networks, putting the same effort towards the same people when we could be sharing this information with each other and doing things a little bit more efficiently. And I think maybe the industry hasn't done quite so well in the past with that. So that's my personal take on it.
Great. Thank you, Jenna. Thank you so much for your presentation. Really useful, and I'm sure the group found it very, very interesting and very helpful. And if you haven't read the report, I really recommend doing so. I would say it's essential reading if you're working in this space. So congratulations on that fantastic work. Okay, I'm going to turn now to Andrea Crosta. Many of you will know him as the founder and executive director of Earth League International. And he's going to talk to us today about criminal networks in Latin America, whose work is increasingly involved in crimes affecting the environment. Andrea, over to you. Thank you.
Hi everyone. Thank you very much, Julia. Really great being with you guys today before Christmas. I'm going to share my screen. Here it is. Do you see it?
Yep, we can see that.
All right. So just a few seconds about us for those not familiar with Earth League International. I established it in Los Angeles towards the end of 2012. We investigate and research transnational environmental crime and the convergence of environmental crime with other serious crime. We'll get there too in a minute. We focus exclusively on the individuals at the very top of the criminal networks. We are not interested in anyone below this level. And that's why we tend to collect information about specific networks for a long period of time, as a minimum 1-2 years before even publishing anything. We are currently collaborating, sharing information with a dozen US governmental agencies that I can say are certainly our main partners at the moment, because they can use tools and they can do things that law enforcement agencies in other countries cannot do. But we also collaborate and share information with other agencies, especially public prosecutors around the world. We found particularly useful in this regard to when we share information outside, not with the US, maybe we can discuss it later in the Q&A. It's not easy, it's not the same, because they cannot do the same thing. So we found easy to collaborate with specific public prosecutors instead of just sharing randomly information with the whole entire law enforcement agencies. This is Sort of snapshot of our work of the past years. We have over 600 persons of interest. We process more than 600 persons of interest, of which we believe at least 150 plus we consider key targets. So for what they do, for where they are placed within the networks. We are talking of some of the most important environmental criminals and wildlife traffickers in the world. Really difficult to investigate, really difficult to collect information about. That's why it takes a long time. And for a total of more than 70 different transnational trafficking networks operating, and collaborating with each other, often locally, regionally, and globally. With the high degree of crime convergence. Just a few words about our most important product, final intelligence product, confidential intelligence brief. We produce many of them every year and many updates every month. We share the CIB only with the governmental agency, partner governmental agency. As I said before, it contains a lot of information about the networks, the members, each member of the networks, the modus operandi, and this is the way we transfer knowledge basically to other law enforcement agencies. It's important to understand that in many cases when we share this information with law enforcement agency, we share information about individuals or networks that are completely unknown to law enforcement. So before even starting to begin thinking about possible arrest or investigation, they have to know about it, know about these people, and this is how we transfer our knowledge. In 2022, we publish, based on our operations in the field, but especially based on our continuous interaction with these people, with the persons of interest, with the targets, with our unique internal POV, point of view. We see the world as they see the world. It's not an external POV, so it's an internal POV. And so we came up with our 4-type environmental crime convergence paradigm, divided in 4 types. Type 1, species convergence, so same people, same networks, trafficking multiple species at the same time. Type 2, environmental crime convergence, so trafficking, so wildlife trafficking plus other kind of crime, environmental crimes like logging, illegal fishing, illegal mining. Type 3, serious crime convergence, so the convergence with money laundering, human smuggling, human trafficking, narco trafficking, and so forth. This is a very important, type 3 is a very important type because it allows us to go, first of all, to get the attention of important big law enforcement agencies that otherwise would not be interested in, for example, type 1 or type 2, and also allow us to go after these people for crimes that are more serious than environmental crime, and that's the whole thing. And type 4 is basically when these networks collaborate with each other in different ways across the globe. And then in 2023, a few months ago, in June, in collaboration with the John Jay College of Criminal Justice, we published this report with this 4-type paradigm, and we pick 5 networks. And by describing these networks, we explain what is environmental crime convergence. John Jay College did a great job in basically mapping pretty much all the literature out there in terms of crime convergence. As you probably some of you know, crime convergence is not a new concept. If you have been dealing with the mafia, organized crime, terrorism, it has been researched for many years, but it's a fairly new concept, fairly new thing in environmental crime, and it's even rarer to have information collected firsthand in the field directly from these networks. Getting to the topic of today's presentation, Latin America. This is a simplified representation of all the networks in Latin America known to us at the moment. We have been investigating most of them and their connections around the world. Just to give you an idea of how these networks work with each other, as you can see, every dot, every color dot is often actually a cluster of different networks and sub-networks, or, as I said before, working with each other locally, regionally, globally. And it's certainly a challenge for law enforcement agencies, governmental agencies in general, that are not often able to investigate these people at this level. We divide, this is a way to describe some of these networks. I picked just two to give you an idea of what is convergence for them. There is a network that we call M3, is based in Mexico, operates a lot also in the US and Asia, China. Type 1 species convergence, big in Totoaba, swim bladders. This network has been identified during Operation Fake Gold that we launched in 2017 to investigate Totoaba trafficking. Totoaba is this big fish endemic of Baja California. At the bottom, you see the swim bladder of this fish. That is that's what they after for TCM, traditional Chinese medicine in China. This bladder goes for $3,000-4,000 a bladder a piece in Baja California, and then in the black market in China it can go for $30,000, $35,000, $40,000, $50,000, even $70,000 a piece. As I said, type 1 converges, not only Totoaba, but also sharkfin and seahorses. This is the vaquita. The gill nets, illegal gill nets used to fish Totoaba, kill the vaquita, but also a lot of other marine species like turtles and birds and all kind of fish. So it is very important to go after the most important traffickers behind this Totoaba trafficking. Type 3, serious crime convergence. This network is involved in money laundering, drug trafficking, especially as a supporting role in money laundering, human smuggling. They smuggle thousands of people from Asia to Mexico, and then from Mexico to the US, corruption. And type 4, network convergence. So they're connected with the Sinaloa cartel, with the Fujian mafia. Very interesting. They also connected with the other networks and people in Europe, especially in the Netherlands and Poland, in Germany, in Italy. We investigated that as well. We will probably release a report next year. Operation Fake Gold, we did a lot of work. We processed hundreds of people of all kind. We produce, of course, a lot. This is just one of the many crime maps that, together with the confidential intelligence brief that had been shared with law enforcement, first Mexican, then the US. And I'm happy to report that all this work finally led to 3 important arrests in June of this year in San Diego. International wildlife trafficker, in my opinion, I think are some of the most important marine products wildlife traffickers ever arrested on US soil. And is a great example of collaboration with the US law enforcement agency after at least 2 years of work on these specific subjects. Another example, as we call it SA8, is based in Peru, but it works all over the places. Big, as you can see, in species convergence, not only shark fin, they put together a container a month of shark fin, but they, at the same time, they are big in jaguar. They, in a single meeting, they offer to us 300 jaguar fangs. At the same time, they offer twice from us a rhino horn. So from South America, the rhino was not in South America, was in South Africa and in Malaysia, but nevertheless, they're able to offer rhino horn from South America. So it's really interesting how species convergence, again, big type 3 convergence as well, especially money laundering. According to them, they launder more than $70 million per year. And networks convergence, they work with another network that we call A1 based in South Africa, and another one that we call SEA4 that is based in Malaysia. This is an example of, for this specific network in Peru, of species convergence. So starting from the left, the jaguar fangs, jaguar skulls, jaguar parts, rhino horn, then in the middle shark fins, and on the right seahorse. At the same time, by the same people. That's type 1 convergence. I hope I was not too fast. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Really, thank you for a very, very, very insightful presentation there. Huge fan of your work. I know a lot of people are. And thank you for highlighting just the scale of the challenge that we're dealing with. I'm going to go to some of the questions. There's a few questions from the audience. The first one, given the global nature of wildlife trafficking, how does Earth League International prioritize regions or species to focus its efforts on? And what criteria are used in this decision-making process? So if you could just provide a few comments on that, that'd be really helpful.
Yeah, it's a good question. It depends. Sometimes we are sort of constrained by the donors, so what the donors want us to do. So we get a specific grant for a specific thing, and then we have to do that, of course. When we manage to raise money on our own, so for general purpose, we can allocate this money for other things. A good example, for example, is Operation Fake Gold, that when we started in 2017, 2018 in Baja California, we couldn't find a single donor. So we sort of self-funded for a long period of time because unfortunately all the money, I mean, back in the day, the donors wanted to put the money into more traditional anti-poaching activities at sea and not so much on intelligence gathering and anti-trafficking activities. Whenever we can, we try, of course, to influence or to try to convince the donor to put the money on a specific topic that we think it's important.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I guess there's a similar question here around this idea of going after the high-level criminals. So I know that you are constrained to some degree by your donors, but I guess speaking more broadly, your own views in terms of whether we should be going after the high-level criminal gangs or perhaps lower-level people actually perpetrating these crimes on the ground. Someone's asking, is there any criminological evidence that going after the higher-level people is the best approach? And given the limited resources that enforcement officers have or forces have, what's the calculation there between low-level and high-level offenders?
Well, I think it's the same principle of, there is a lot of, I think, similarities with narco trafficking, with one important distinction based on my personal experience of more than 20 years. At the very top of environmental crime networks and wildlife trafficking networks, the people are rarely flat-out criminals, are very often businessmen with their hands pretty much everywhere, including in legal activities. So we have a higher chance of scare them off and push them out of nature crime if you apply pressure. It's not as in narco trafficking, for example, that you arrest someone and immediately someone will just replace them. It's not like this. For example, the arrest I mentioned before in Southern California, we had assets on the ground on the other side of the border in Mexico, and almost immediately all Totoaba traffickers, including middle-level facilitators, stopped placing orders for Totoaba because they got scared. That doesn't happen with narco traffickers, of course, but in wildlife crime, environmental crime, very often happens. So you have a greater power of disruption and degradation by hitting as high as possible than going to low-level criminal. I'm not saying that you are not supposed to do anti-poaching activities. Of course, you do that as well at the same time.
Great. Thank you, Andrea. I guess another question, my question, if you'll indulge me. Obviously, one of the aims of the Nature Crime Alliance, one of our kind of 3 pillars, is to raise political will to do more on nature crime. You obviously do a lot of work, with the documentaries and other public engagement activities to try and do that. But where do you gauge the current political will for change on these issues, and what do you think needs to happen to kind of move the dial on that?
Well, it's really complicated. From an operational point of view, I want to echo what in the recommendation of WJC and what Jenna said before. We do need more long-term intelligence work and investigation. It's still, in terms of investment, in terms of organizations that really do that, we're still a fraction. It's just a fraction of all of us do that, and it's just too little. So policymakers or decision makers need to invest more on that. Crime convergence shows that we do need the task force of different law enforcement agencies working together. And too often, unfortunately, in many countries, these crimes, at the moment is an environmental crime or wildlife crime, is given to an agency with very little teeth and very little powers and very little resources. And crime convergence can help us to show that the picture is more complicated, and you do need to create task force of different law enforcement agencies working together.
Great. Thank you, Andrea. And that last point just talked to another question that we had around how can we change this this issue of resources around giving financial investigators more resources to deal with these issues. So, but I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. What I will say is, if any of you haven't seen the New Yorker article on Earth League International, I think it was published in the spring. It's an absolutely fantastic piece of long form journalism. I think the journo was with you for a year, wasn't he, Andrea, in your team, embedded?
Yeah,
And,
it was embedded with us for nearly a year. Yeah, it was just
yeah, and
it was like filming another documentary, with the difference that he was not filming; he was just taking notes. That's the
yeah, and but it's a fantastic piece. And if you'd like to find out more about ELI, I think it's a great place to start. That New Yorker article. Okay, Andrea, thank you so much for your presentation and for your thoughts today. Really appreciate it. I'm going to move now to the fisheries sector, and it's my great honor to welcome Braddock Spear from Sustainable Fisheries Partnership, where he is a global policy director. And SFP are doing some really cool work with the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN on universal fishery IDs. And so to tell us more, over to you, Braddock. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Luke. And thanks to the Nature Crime Alliance. Great to have this venue and have us all together. Can you see my screen okay?
Yep, I can.
Great. So yeah, I'm going to take you into a little bit of a different flavor for these slides, much less focused on actual crimes and more about some of the gaps that we see in the fisheries world and trying to close those gaps. So universal fishery IDs is the project today. There we go. And a little bit about Sustainable Fisheries Partnership. We've been around for about 15 years. We are made up of over 50 experts around the world in about 20 different countries, working both in the producer countries of seafood and fisheries and in the end markets. The way we work is with the seafood industry. We partner with major seafood retailers, brands, and food service companies around the world. So we work with these major buyers in the seafood industry to engage their supply chains. And so using the leverage, using the existing connections to push for fisheries improvement, to reduce the environmental impacts of fishing and fish farming, to try and generate better or sustain economic activities for fishing communities. So getting at one of the questions earlier about trying to incentivize good behavior and put some of the bad actors on that path. And ultimately, because we are just an NGO that most people haven't heard of, we're probably not going to be around forever. So trying to build the conditions within the industry to self-sustain these sort of improvements. We've worked in illegal fishing in fisheries in our past. We've helped work with the supply chain to close out illegal fishing in Barents Sea cod. We ourselves have done some work in Mexican shrimp as well in the upper Gulf related to fishing in closed areas with closed gear, very much connected to some of the story Andrea talked about. But today we're talking more about sort of the systematic gaps that exist in fishing and really, I think, prohibit some of the in dealing with some of the nature crimes in the industry. And so there's a significant lack of traceability within the industry, even just back to a single fishery, not necessarily even back to a single vessel, but just back to an area or back to a particular flag of a vessel or what gear type they're using. And so because there's this lack of traceability, there's not strong assurance in a lot of cases of what product is actually being traded and consumed. And because of that lack of traceability, the seafood industry historically is just reluctant to be transparent about what they're sourcing and about where the product has come from, just because they sometimes don't know or don't have good assurance. We found that there are significant disconnects between the private sector and importing and exporting governments, and in the framing of the universal IDs. In this case, it's down to simple information sharing and being able to to trade information that would help address some of these issues in fisheries. And then, of course, if you don't know exactly where your fish is coming from or what kind of fish it even is, there's absolutely the potential for unintentional mislabeling and even more opaqueness to commit intentional fraud. So what is a universal fishery ID? I like to frame it as a unique code for every single fishery in the world, every commercial fishery in the world in particular. It's similar to a universal product code, a UPC. So we've all been to the store and seen that barcode on the product. There are numbers underneath that that relate to different pieces of information. There's actually a logic to those numbers and a standard to be able to communicate information about those products. So not that we're going to put a barcode on every fish in the world, but I'll show you just the standard that we're using to help identify a source of the fishery. Other standards are like the IBAN and SWIFT codes to help the banking world, such that you can take money out of a ATM, not from your bank, but still receive money and have that communication flow between the different banks because these standards have been created. For our fisheries ID standard, we've worked a lot with global fishery experts around the world, fisheries managers, seafood industry representatives, academics, other NGOs like Sustainable Fisheries Partnership, and of course the United Nations FAO. Been working with them for about 7 years on this. And just recently, well, this past year, we got some funding from the United Nations Development Program to bring the IDs more to life and to do some testing. So ultimately, we're talking about a common language or a common translator to talk about source fisheries. So apologies in advance to getting really wonky on this slide. So technically, we're talking about a traceability unit in the FAO database. This is the standard that we've created with them. If you look at the top, the pieces of the ID, there's the species. There's some area fields of where the fish was actually caught. There's the management authority who's responsible for managing that fishery and enforcement. There's the flag of the vessel who caught the product, and then what type of gear that they are using. All of these pieces of information come back to some sort of sustainability or environmental impact that is important. And then I'll flag to you the third line and the fourth line. These are the actual codes that are being produced. They're the semantic identifier is technically human readable because it does go back to some source identification lists and helps to, again, identify the source fishery. And then the IT identifier, this is what gets the IT and database people really excited, because it allows for unambiguous flow of information through computers, through databases, and really linking things like the web with other pieces of technical equipment. And then each source fishery will have its own record in the database. So for the UNDP project that I mentioned earlier, there are 2 pilot projects where we've engaged a supply chain from the producers all the way up to the end market. The first one is with Thai Union through their Chicken of the Sea brand, one of the largest seafood companies in the world. They are buying a lot of Philippines blue swimming crab, BSC, and recognize that they didn't have full visibility into exactly where their product's coming from, even within the Philippines. And so they've put their hand up and are taking initiative and leadership in building these IDs into traceability systems that they're investing in. And we did a field visit back in May, and the Philippines government also put up their hand and said, hey, you know, we like the idea of standardizing our information and aligning with the seafood industry. So they too are now piloting the IDs to help with their fisheries management of the resource. And we'll soon be engaging the end markets, in particular, in this case, the Publix supermarkets are an end buyer and then seller to consumers. The second pilot, which just started a couple of months ago, is in South Africa, tuna and swordfish. We have a really strong partner in Cape Fish who exports the product to Europe and the US. In particular, they're selling into a company called Invisible in the US, who's a distributor. We're just starting to get an idea of the fisheries that they're sourcing from and attaching the IDs and figuring out our goals for the pilot, but more on that one to come. And so what is the vision for these IDs? My view is we need as much of the seafood industry as quickly as possible, integrating them into their own systems for identifying their source fisheries and sharing that information with their trading partners. And then the other piece, either in parallel or to facilitate that, is essentially getting importing and exporting governments and markets to require that these IDs are part of documentation. It's quite fragmented in terms of what's required currently. Some require just species, some require country of processing. And so the IDs help to bring all of that together in a more standardized way, and will essentially help facilitate freer flow of information and product while keeping it more rigorous in terms of its source. And the time frame, I think this is our last slide. Now through May, which is where we have the funding from UNDP, is to find partners, even joint ventures, potentially more funders to help us with this work, volunteers in the seafood industry or governments to say, hey, we'd like to use these IDs or start piloting them as well. In February, in working with the FAO, we're aiming for about 5,000 fishery records with the IDs public. We estimate that's probably like 90% or so of traded volumes globally, maybe only about 50% of the numbers of fisheries in the world. And then at the end of May, at the conclusion of the project, we'll wrap up our pilot projects with the supply chains, with lessons learned to try and get others to participate. And we're also putting together a business plan, one in a traditional sense, see if there's any revenue generation opportunities here to help sustain the database and this tool, but also just to realize the vision of getting more and more users to use the IDs. So that was a lot in a little time. Yeah, back over to you, Luke.
That's great. Thank you so much, Braddock. Really interesting, and you never need to apologize for being wonky on one of our calls. We love the wonky stuff. No, really interesting work, and definitely in line with some of the stuff that we talk about within the Alliance. I guess you mentioned there the approach to kind of get more governments involved on like almost making it like a regulatory issue. I guess my question is around the private sector, the fishing industry's perception of this. I mean, have you found it to be quite welcoming, or are you experiencing like any pushback or resistance to this excellent initiative? Thanks.
I wouldn't say we've experienced pushback. We have experienced a bit of confusion, maybe, in terms of how the IDs would be applied in their systems. And maybe because of the wonkiness, it takes a little bit of sort of reiteration of what it actually looks like in terms of implementation. But once that switch happens, the companies see the value and are using the IDs as a catalyst to improve their traceability within their supply chains.
Okay, great, thank you. And I think there's a similar question which has just come in, which I will go to, which is how is corporate accountability integrated into this ID system? Have you given much thought about that? Thanks.
Let's see, that's a separate initiative for us, I would say. We work with these major buyers that I mentioned in the beginning and start engaging with them by working with them to put together a public commitment around their seafood sourcing. And so we've worked with many for many years, and sort of accountability on ourselves as well to make sure that those are not static commitments, that they are evolving with the data and information that's out there, just with the known risks that are out there, such that they can continue to engage. Because this, I mean, in our view, sustainability is not a it's not an end line. It's a continuous thing that needs to happen for due diligence. Great,
Thank you very much. I think we've probably got time for one more question, which has just come in. Have you been using eDNA and port authorities in your work?
Very little, not us directly, but some of the supply chains we work in, like in octopus in particular, which is known for just mislabeling, whether it's intentional or not. There's some neat technology coming online there. So some of our partners have been testing it out. And port authorities, I think they are going to be one of our target audiences within the government frameworks, as that first point of contact, receiving the information, or receiving the product and the information about the product, to make sure that they, they're able to lock the IDs into the system along with the product.
Great, thank you very much. And we do have time, so I'm going to leave you with an easy question, which is probably a nice one just for people to find out a bit more about SFP, which is which countries and regions do you generally work on?
We work globally. It's in terms of the markets where we work, the end markets, it's North America, largely UK, Southern Europe, as well as expanding our footprint in Asia, in Japan and Indonesia. We also have some markets work in Central and South America. In terms of fisheries production, yeah, it's all the big fisheries in the world, all across Asia, all the whitefish fisheries. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Braddock, for sharing those insights with us. Really interesting work, and hopefully it will make a huge difference to the fishing industry and global fish stocks generally. So we're almost at time. First of all, I just want to say a huge thank you to all of our speakers today, to Jenna, to Andrea, to Braddock, and of course to Julia, for sharing your insights with us today. Really appreciate it. Big thank you to you, the audience. We really hope that you found this useful and informative. And I would encourage you to do engage with us. You can contact us through the Secretariat email, which is secretariat@naturecrimealliance.org. And do join our mailing list via our website, because it's the best way to keep in touch with opportunities and information that might be of interest to you. And if you are a Nature Crime Alliance member on this call and you'd like to be spotlighted in a future session, again, do get in touch with us through the Secretariat or your relevant point of contact. But that's it from us. Thank you so much. We wish you all the very best. If you're celebrating the festive break, have a great time and a restful break. And we'll see you all again in 2024. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Thank you, guys. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.